Alright boys, welcome back to another reasonable price prediction, the series where we try to figure out where your favorite altcoins could be headed. Now today, we're looking at Litecoin. And the reason I say boys as well is because literally 99% of you are lads. And I think that remaining 1% is my mum and my sister. So shout out my mum and my sister for keeping it inclusive, innit? Anyway, looking at Litecoin, getting straight into it, we can see last few weeks, last few months realistically, ever since beginning of April, end of March, Litecoin has been suffering. And we can see that we managed to break above this trend that we were trading in for a long time, and then we came back down into it, and now we could potentially be moving below it. Now we've seen wicks out of this trend before, so it's no immediate cause for alarm, but I'm going to be looking at a few of the past times that we've also had moves like this. You can actually see that basically every halving we get something pretty similar to this, where we have a rally up either just before the halving or a few months before the halving, and then some kind of correction. We can see if we go back to this first cycle Litecoin ever had, we get a move up of about 70% from the previous high before that, from where we kind of close to where we bottomed out. Basically we move up for about 70% from high to high, and then we come back down and we come pretty close to that same level. And you can see if we go to Litecoin's second cycle, we get this kind of mini bull run, we get a equally mini bear run. Afterwards we get a bit of a fake out where again from like the previous high we move up about 70%, and then we come back down into this range that we operate within. And as well, that's something I wanted to point out as well, for the first cycle as well, we come back into this range and we basically operate within it. And you can see we do oftentimes wick below this range, but we don't get any closes. That's the important thing. So again, just zooming out, taking a look, we can see that every halving Litecoin's had, it gets a move, a strong move, either just before the halving or a little bit before the halving, and then it basically sees those gains wipe themselves out. They usually come back down to a similar level they were at before, but slowly trends up until we hit our bull run. Same thing here, even with COVID where we had the big scare, you know, the ass fell out of everything, we still continued to trend up slowly until we got our bull run. Here we can see pretty similar story. We have our minor bull run, minor bear run. I would argue this was not a bull run. You can say it was because basically we kept putting in higher lows and higher highs for a very prolonged period, basically about a year from June to July. We kept putting in highs, so a year and a month. Some kind of a correction, dropped down a level basically, but continued to trend up afterwards. And we can see as well before the halving we got our move up out of this range, and then we've been trading down ever since then. If we take a look at what we've seen previously, we can see that we do often trade down, especially this first cycle, which I think is more comparable to what we're currently going through, and I'll get into that why in a minute. We can see we do trade down for about 8 weeks afterwards, so equivalent to 2 months more or less. We can see this COVID scare, I would argue, condensed a lot of the downward price action. We got it all more suddenly and more quickly instead of the usual slower bleed that we would have got with Litecoin in this situation. Ultimately, there's no way of knowing. So if we're kind of saying, well, we're going to be bleeding for at least 3 weeks after the high, you can see now we're actually at 11 weeks. So this is the longest kind of bleed Litecoin has had with this move, where we move up before the halving and then we start coming back down. And again, it's the first time as well where we kind of, well, excluding COVID, where we again came down to this low and we even wicked below it for quite a while. It's the first time that we've really kind of come immediately down and really tested this support. You could argue that if COVID wasn't here, we wouldn't have had such a drastic move. You can argue all you want, you'll never know for sure. But just keep in mind, it is pretty similar to the COVID style move, and there hasn't been a world-threatening event this halving. So just something to keep in mind. It's looking a bit bearish. Another thing that's interesting is that when we previously look at Litecoin and we see that we get these mini bull runs followed by these mini bear runs, we often see that Litecoin moves a step up. The bear run doesn't take it down as low as it was before. Bull run brings us up, and then we drop down about 50% of where we moved up to, and basically slowly trend up from there. This was the same with COVID, and again, you could argue if we didn't have the COVID scare, we wouldn't have come back down to this low. You can see that with COVID, we actually come down and retest the lows we were at the start of the bull run. So that would be equivalent in 2016, 2015, if we came back down to kind of the $1 level. Instead, we remained at about $3. With COVID, the lows were about $24, and we basically came right back down to that. even if it was extremely briefly, we came back down there. But ultimately, if you're excluding kind of wicks, only looking at opens and closes, we remained at a relatively higher level above where we started. Now here, if we take a look at where we're currently at, we can see we are still quite a bit high above. And we can see that if you do want to call this the kind of bull run, quote unquote, mini bull run, we can see Litecoin moved up and then came back down to a higher level than it was before, basically a higher low. And we can see we have continued to trend up. So that is something that would also support this theory and would kind of remain pretty bullish. Again, to point out, I don't think I mentioned it, but we moved up a smaller amount this cycle compared to the last few cycles where we've moved up roughly around 70% each time before. Here we've moved up about 55. So a noticeable change, but not drastic enough for it to be something to disregard the comparison over. So in terms of what we could see after this, if we kind of take a look at how long afterwards usually we have to wait for a bull run, we can see that when we bottomed out here, it was 36 weeks after this bottoming out. And that was before the halving, last cycle. If we're taking this as our bottom, we're saying this is the lowest we'll go. We're going to keep trending up from here. This is also the move that comes directly after the peak, the kind of trend breaker that we often see. If we go 36 weeks out from here, like we did before, that puts you in early February. And we can see that's when we think the bull run will start. If it's going to be a similar amount of time, early February is quite a long way away, close to a year, 8 months. So just something to be aware of. If you still are a believer of this left translated cycle that we're going to have a bull run this year, Litecoin's past performance is kind of suggesting otherwise. If you think that what we're seeing is more or less equivalent to what we've seen before, which I actually would kind of believe. I think we're following it pretty similarly, especially when you kind of keep things as vague and as basic as I have in this video. When you haven't gone really nitty gritty, we can see the general moves are the same. We get this key kind of general move that we often see, and then we've continued to see the general trend that we've seen previously continue to play out now as well. So another thing you could argue is that, well, we've been in this trend already for ages, so we're actually just going to spend a kind of fixed amount of time in this trend. And if you want to argue it was, say, 44 weeks of being in this trend, we'll say 50 weeks, make it a nice even number, 50 weeks, make it a nice even number. We can see that, well, we'll argue we came into the trend here, 50 weeks forward, that would put you in August. Now that would line up much more with a left translated cycle, saying that we're going to break out of this trend and move to the upside August time. And then that would kind of give you, your highs by the end of the year, give or take. We can see that it's only a few months that it takes for Litecoin to kind of make these drastic moves. Like the rest of the altcoin space, roughly around 18 weeks. So if you think more along the lines of, well, we're just going to spend the same amount of time doing the same amount of thing, go for it. But what you will notice is that we've, so far, we've had time frames that are completely different to what we've seen previously. This is kind of the longest mini bull run that we've ever seen with Litecoin. This was the shortest mini bear run that we've ever seen with Litecoin, if you want to class it as that. So you're assuming something to remain true when you have evidence of it not remaining true in recent history. But again, if that's what you believe that. I'm just pointing out what I would kind of see. Again, if you want to go back to the first cycle, see how long we kind of stayed in this trend. This one was much longer. We'll say we entered the trend here and we left it somewhere around here. It was 60 weeks. And again, going from 60 weeks from where we kind of entered the trend, you're looking at more or less a Q4 start of the bull run, end of October, which again would kind of more line up with the 4-year cycle kind of holding true, where we see the start of our bull run at the beginning of 2025, like what we saw with 2021, where things started to really pick up November time, 2021. Ultimately, though, I do think it does come down to what's happening in America in terms of the election and the money printer. Anyway, enough with the USD. Let's have a look at, to be honest with you, I think it's one of my favorite charts in crypto because it's easy pickings. I look at this chart against Bitcoin and it reinforces all my beliefs that Bitcoin is king for 80% of the cycle. And we can see that's the case with Litecoin. And well, Bitcoin's been king against Litecoin forever, basically. If we zoom out and get the whole chart on the screen so we can see all the information possible, Litecoin has never been higher against Bitcoin. It's never been gaining value against Bitcoin since 30 weeks after its launch back in basically 2014, Litecoin's just gone down against Bitcoin. And we've had moves up that are great. And if you were able to time them, you did well. But ultimately, if you just held Bitcoin and Litecoin for the same amount of time, you made a lot more money holding Bitcoin. And this is something that I don't think a lot of people see because they like these altcoins. Maybe they've held them for a long time. And in the bull runs, the coins do well. They do 5-6x's. And so they just believe that it's a really good coin because it's made these crazy moves before. But they're kind of blocking out the fact that the coin has gone down 99% in the interim between those crazy bull market moves. I'm not here to knock anyone. And to be honest with you, if you're still holding Litecoin at the moment, you're probably going to see this kind of a move sooner rather than later. Probability suggests, because we haven't seen a move like this with Litecoin, you can argue, we'll say here was the last one. You haven't seen one of them in over 105 weeks. So basically 2 years was the last time Litecoin actually performed well in any significant way against Bitcoin. And we can see as well that as the cycles go on, those moves really start to shrink. They shrink down. And while in 2016, 2017, great few moves, 2018, smaller move, 2021, which was, again, I will say the best bull run crypto has ever seen, just in terms of the amount of money that was forced into the market and the amount of money that was just generated. Again, the best time for the stock market, probably ever. I would argue Litecoin against Bitcoin went up 100%, give or take here. The 2021 bull run move pushed Litecoin up 100% up against Bitcoin. After falling basically 93% since its inception. So it falls 93%, doubles its money against Bitcoin in the space of 2 months, and then just continues to go down. And that's currently what we're still seeing. Litecoin has just been going down. And we can see as well that every halving, Litecoin just continues to go down for kind of the foreseeable future. We can see that if we measure how long each time after the halving Litecoin goes down for, we can see after the first halving, it was 34 weeks. Second halving, it was 45 weeks. If you want to take a middle ground and just say 40 weeks afterwards, let's quickly run this up. 40 weeks afterwards, you're basically going to be trending down until January 2025, which again suggests that we're getting some kind of a bull run early 2025. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future, but what the charts have told me, whether it's the ones that I look at in these videos that I share with you, or just my own personal private research and time I spend looking at things, I still believe we're getting a bull run 2025. I don't think we're getting a bull run this year. I don't think we're getting one 2024. I think as well that roughly lines up because if the Fed in America starts to cut rates in, say, September time, they might be finished by February, March. And we know that the best bull runs that crypto has ever seen is when rates are low and the Fed is not cutting or hiking. It's just kept low. And that would kind of line up with where the rest of these charts are pointing. Sometime Q1 2025 when the bull run would start. But that's just me. You should come to your own conclusions on this. I'm just putting a chart in front of you and talking. Last thing to note is that kind of from cycle high to the next cycle low, Litecoin often drops about 94%, 95%. We can see that's done it so far without fail. Obviously, we can't see what's happened here yet because we haven't had the low yet for this cycle. Realistically, we won't know for sure until kind of 2029 or 2030, whenever the next halving is. But just be aware that a similar drop, in fact, a more generous, nice drop of only 93% would bring you down to about 500 sats against Litecoin. And just remember, the high that Litecoin was at was 50,000 sats. So it would actually be moving down to 1% of its high. But you could argue its launch price as well. It was 35 sats, 36,000 sats that it launched at, and it made a move to the upside of 50,000 sats that it never returned to. And to be honest with you, looking at a chart like this, I would argue that it never will return to it either. Unless some kind of catastrophic event happens specifically to Bitcoin, or Litecoin has some crazy news that no one knows about until it hits. I don't think that's what you should base an investment off, personally. That's not financial advice. but I would not buy an asset in the hopes that it will announce something completely revolutionary when historically it hasn't done that. And even when it has had good news, it's ultimately just led to worse price action. Anyway, gonna wrap up the video there. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. If you liked, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. Consider clicking the video up here, and also check out the links in the description for the Reddit and the Twitter. Want to start kind of building that up a bit, because why not? I get to post a few memes and engage with you dudes. So thanks so much, take care, and peace.